It was just a regular night some time ago, when I was still just a kid. That December, I had one big wish, to meet the real Santa Claus. I was obsessed with photography and videos, recording everything I saw. I photographed even the simplest things, like the trees around our house, the fireplace, and even a jar of burned cookies my mom had taught me to bake. Among my friends, I was the only one who still believed in Santa Claus. "You still believe in that?" my friend Chris would ask, and I simply didn't argue, because I was a stubborn kid and was sure that if I believed hard enough, I would actually see Santa Claus on Christmas Eve when the clock struck midnight. And, in a way, I was right. If you'd rather keep living without knowing the truth, it might be better to stop watching this video now. That year, I was determined to be the first to capture concrete proof of Santa Claus' existence. In my childish mind, I imagined that soon newspapers and TV channels all over the world would show my evidence, interviewing me as the little kid who proved everyone wrong. I was excited about the idea that people would finally start believing. On Christmas Eve, my parents took turns putting me to bed. Before turning off the lights and going to their room, I already knew what I would do. As soon as I heard the door softly close, I quietly went down the stairs and began looking for the best place to hide my camera to get the best shot. I tested several spots, like the fireplace, the window, and even the kitchen where I had left the burned cookies. Time passed, and when the clock finally struck midnight, something unexpected happened. That's when I heard it. The basement door creaked open. I thought that was strange because I had always imagined that Santa Claus would come down the chimney. A part of me wanted to go up and greet him, but I decided to hide and watch what would happen. I hid behind the sofa in the living room, peeking around the side towards the Christmas tree. Everything seemed calm until I heard a whistle. It wasn't a cheerful whistle, and it certainly didn't seem like something that would belong to the Christmas spirit. The snow was falling heavily outside, and suddenly I realized how isolated we were. The wind was picking up, and my parents didn't wake up. I turned my attention back to the basement door. That's when I saw a tall figure, covered by a cloak, seemingly floating, slowly approaching. I thought about screaming, but I tried to calm myself, still believing it could be Santa Claus. I kept watching as the figure walked toward the Christmas tree. The whistling was heard again, and this time I recognized the melody, Silent Night, but completely off-key. The sound made me feel deeply uncomfortable. As the figure came closer to the tree, it began sniffing the branches, and the tree shook under the force of the creature. It then spoke. "Get out, kid." A shiver ran down my spine. It had seen me. I took a deep breath, stood up, and approached it. The creature told me to get closer, and as I stood before it, I felt small, smaller than I had ever felt. You're Santa Claus?" I asked. The creature made an almost inaudible sound, like a laugh, before pulling off its cloak. I fainted at that moment, and when I woke up, the creature was still there, standing in front of me, a faint smile on its face. "You're not the first to faint when you see me," it said. "You're lucky I didn't swallow you." I stammered. "Swallow me?" I asked. "Yes," it replied. "It's very offensive to faint when you see someone you know." I didn't know what to say, but the creature continued, revealing its appearance. It was thin, terrifyingly thin, and its face was indescribable. Its teeth were visible, but there were no eyes, and spines protruded from its head. It then explained that it wasn't Santa Claus but his brother. The idea that this terrifying creature was Santa Claus' brother took some time for my childish brain to process. "He's my brother," the creature said. I asked, curious. "You know Santa Claus?" It smiled and replied, "Yes, but he's different. I bring balance to the good he spreads. Where there is kindness, there must be cruelty. I am the evil that balances the good." My mind began to spin, and I couldn't help but ask, "So, what evil have you brought to us?" There was a long silence before the answer. "You're very wise, kid. Are you sure you want to know?" it asked. Despite my fear, I nodded. It continued, "My gifts don't come on December 25th, but they'll be felt throughout the next year, or maybe even longer." Then, it pulled a sack from behind it and placed it on the ground in front of me. Inside, there was a present with my parents' names written on a dark card. "Open it," it whispered. As I began to open the box, A chill filled the room. The wind outside picked up violently, and the lights began to flicker. Inside the box, there was a blinding purple glow, and as I looked closer, I began to see my nightmares coming to life. I saw my father's car accident, my mother's illness. I saw it all happen. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, holding back tears. The creature paused and whispered, "I must go." With a gentle movement, it pulled the cloak over its head, concealing its form again, and began to float back toward the basement steps. Before disappearing into the darkness, it said, "Fear what is to come, child, but don't let fear consume you as it did to me." The last thing I heard was its voice saying, "Only in death and suffering will you find life." My name is Afonso. I'm 42 years old, and the story I'm about to tell happened to me last year. It was past midnight, Christmas Eve, and it had been a year since I had returned to my home. Today, I could only come back for a few hours, of course, but here I am. Everything is so quiet and empty. My wife and children are no longer here. They passed away. In fact, I don't know why it would be good to return to my home on Christmas, since I feel more alone than ever. But I came back, and not only that, I prepared the dinner as I always did. I wouldn't let my wife cook on Christmas Eve. I was the one responsible for doing it. Her name was Natalia. My eldest daughter was named Laura, and she was 8 years old, while Pedro, the youngest, was 6 years old. I prepared the dinner, but I didn't eat. Nobody else was there. The low lights of the red Christmas candles scattered around the kitchen were the only sources of illumination. Everything was so quiet. I couldn't even put on some music to accompany my solitary meal. Suddenly, I heard laughter echoing in the hallway. It was my son Pedro's laughter, and I would recognize that laughter even after 100 years. Soon after, I heard running footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen, stopped when he saw me, and stared at me. I couldn't say anything. His skin was pale, and his eyes were deep set. He simply sat down at the table, staring at me. Then, I saw a figure forming in the corner of the wall. It was Laura, my daughter. She also had the same ghostly appearance as her brother. Once again, silence dominated the environment. She looked at me and sat down at the table in her usual place, Pedro on her right and Laura on her left, facing me. There was still an empty chair, Natalia's chair. Despite everything seeming scary, I still thought, maybe Natalia will appear too? Then, a volume formed behind the curtain, poorly lit by the candles. The volume began to move towards the table slowly, until the curtain cloth no longer covered Natalia's face. She was there, just like my children, pale, with deep-set eyes. She looked at me and sat down at the table. The family was reunited. They all looked at me, but they didn't seem hungry. I started to despair, not understanding what was happening. Suddenly, a green liquid began to come out of their mouths, as if it were vomit. They continued to expel the liquid, without moving, just staring at me. Then Laura, with her mouth dirty, said, "Why did you do this, Dad?" My eyes filled with tears. Pedro, running his hand on his neck, said, "It hurt a lot, Dad." Natalia then said, "We didn't deserve this, Afonso." My breathing became labored. I started to cry. And that's when a memory took over my mind. The week of Christmas last year, I lost my job. I worked with H. Frut, and as if that wasn't enough, we spent all our savings, including Natalia's, to invest in a car that would help with deliveries. But that week, a hailstorm devastated our orchard, and I didn't have insurance. Now, I had no money and didn't know what to do. I looked for a friend, who couldn't help me financially, but introduced me to Bitcoin, the money of the future, he told me. He told me that on Christmas Eve, the value of Bitcoin could increase a lot and that I should invest without fear. I had 5,000 reis, which was my last savings, so I bought everything in Bitcoin. The currency fell so much that my 5,000 reis became only 100. I was ruined and with a family to take care of. On Christmas Eve, I went to the market and bought everything on credit to prepare the dinner. When everything was ready, I put rat poison in the food. I didn't want to see my family suffer. I didn't want to see them in misery. I didn't want them to be ashamed of their failed father. At the table, I looked at their happy faces for the last time, until they started convulsing and vomiting. After that, I would also take poison, but Pedro didn't die like the others. He got up from the table, opened the living room door, and even though he was vomiting, he still managed to get out. In despair, I grabbed him at the door. The neighbor in the apartment in front was receiving guests and saw everything. I closed the door quickly and squeezed his neck until he stopped breathing. The neighbor started knocking on the door insistently, and I went to the kitchen, took the rat poison, and my vision began to fade. But, to my misfortune, I woke up handcuffed in the hospital. I didn't die. I think God wanted to punish me for everything I did. I was imprisoned for murder and, since then, I have been incarcerated. Today, I got a temporary Christmas release, and here I am, at home, sitting at the table at the Christmas dinner, looking at the ghosts of my family. I put a can of rat poison in my soup. My loves, you can continue to watch me and see me die. I will be with you soon. I hope you can forgive me so we can be together. Please leave your like and subscribe to the channel to support my project bringing horror stories.